There is something inside you making decisions before you realize a decision has been made. It chooses who attracts you, who irritates you, what you fear, what you avoid, what you repeatedly destroy just when it begins to matter. And perhaps the most disturbing part is this: you can spend your entire life obeying it while believing you are completely free. Think about the patterns you have repeated. The relationship that somehow felt different in the beginning, but ended with the same emotional wound. The opportunity you wanted desperately, until it finally came close enough to become real, and suddenly you procrastinated, hesitated, or found a reason to walk away. The person who triggered an anger in you so disproportionate that later you wondered why their words had affected you so deeply. The moments when you knew exactly what you should do, and still did the opposite. We usually explain these things with simple words: bad luck, personality, chemistry, timing, trauma, fate. But Carl Jung believed something far more unsettling. He believed that beneath the personality you consciously recognize exists another psychological world, ancient, emotional, symbolic, and largely invisible. And when you do not understand that world, it does not remain passive. It begins to live your life for you. This may be one of the most important ideas you ever encounter about yourself. What you do not know about yourself can have more power over your life than what you do know. And before this video ends, you may recognize a force inside yourself that has been influencing you for years, perhaps decades. Once you recognize it, however, something changes. Because what has been controlling you from darkness loses some of its power the moment you can finally see it. If you're drawn to this kind of deeper exploration of the psyche, subscribe and stay with me. Because what we're about to uncover isn't about becoming someone else. It's about discovering who has been living your life alongside you. And to understand that, we need to begin with a strange question. Who exactly are you? Not your name. Not your profession, not your history, not the personality you show other people. Who are you when all of those things disappear? Most people have an immediate answer. They believe they know themselves because they know their preferences. I am calm. I am generous. I am independent. I am rational. I am a good person. I would never do something like that. And that last sentence is especially interesting, because whenever someone says, I would never do that, a psychological boundary has just appeared. On one side stands the person you accept yourself to be. On the other side stands everything you believe you are not. Jung became fascinated with that second side, because human beings do something extraordinary when parts of themselves threaten the identity they have constructed. They hide them. Imagine a child who becomes angry. The child expresses the anger openly, but perhaps the parents react with rejection. Good children don't behave like that. So the child learns something. Not necessarily that anger should be understood, but that anger threatens love. Another child cries easily. Someone says, "Stop being weak." The child learns that vulnerability creates shame. Another child is naturally loud, ambitious, demanding, curious, rebellious. But every time those qualities appear, something happens. Punishment, embarrassment, withdrawal of affection, comparison, rejection. And slowly, almost invisibly, the child begins making psychological negotiations. If I hide this part of myself, perhaps I will still belong. If I become quieter, perhaps they will love me. If I stop showing anger, perhaps I will be safe. If I become useful, perhaps they won't leave. If I become perfect, perhaps no one will reject me. Years pass. The child becomes an adult, and the adult forgets that the negotiation ever happened. But the rejected parts did not disappear. That is where the story becomes dangerous. Because the psyche does not simply erase what consciousness refuses to accept, it pushes it somewhere else. Jung called that territory the shadow. But the shadow is often misunderstood. People imagine it as some evil version of themselves hiding inside the mind. That is too simplistic. Your shadow contains whatever your conscious identity was unable or unwilling to include. Yes, it may contain rage, jealousy, aggression, sexual impulses, resentment, cruelty. But it can also contain courage, ambition, creativity, sensuality, assertiveness, independence, even joy. A person who was taught never to become angry may bury their capacity to defend themselves. A person taught that wanting attention was selfish may bury their desire to be seen. A person punished for ambition may eventually pretend not to care about success. And years later, they may look at someone who freely expresses that forbidden quality and feel something powerful: irritation, disgust, envy, fascination. Sometimes all four at once. And this is where Jung's psychology becomes uncomfortable, because the people who provoke the strongest reactions in you may sometimes be carrying something that belongs to you. Not literally. Psychologically. They may be expressing something you were forced to abandon. This is projection. And projection is one of the most effective ways the unconscious hides itself. Instead of seeing something inside ourselves, we see it outside ourselves. You meet someone arrogant and cannot stop thinking about their arrogance. Someone selfish ruins your entire day. Someone confident makes you strangely uncomfortable. Someone successful triggers an irritation you immediately try to justify. They're fake. They're lucky. They don't deserve it. Maybe. Sometimes people really are arrogant, selfish, dishonest, or destructive. Jung's point was not that every judgment is false. The deeper question is, why does this particular person possess so much emotional power over you? Why can they enter a room and alter your internal state without even speaking to you? Why are you still arguing with them inside your head hours later? Whenever the emotional reaction becomes much larger than the situation itself, something deeper may have been touched. And if you investigate that reaction instead of immediately obeying it, you may discover something extraordinary. The emotion has a history. Maybe you hate arrogance because you were never permitted to be proud. Maybe you despise selfishness because you spent your entire life abandoning yourself for others. Maybe another person's freedom irritates you because you built your identity around obedience. Maybe confidence triggers you because somewhere inside you lives a version of yourself that desperately wants permission to stop apologizing for existing. The shadow doesn't only contain what is ugly. Sometimes it contains the life you were too afraid to live. And this changes everything. Because now your strongest emotional reactions are no longer merely inconveniences. They become clues. Every disproportionate reaction becomes a doorway. Every recurring conflict becomes evidence. Every person you cannot stop judging becomes a potential mirror. And once you begin looking at life this way, a strange pattern appears. You may realize that you've been meeting the same psychological situation again and again, only wearing different faces, different partner, same wound, different workplace, same conflict, different friendship, same betrayal, different opportunity, same self-sabotage, different year, same emotional ending. At some point you have to ask, how many coincidences can happen before a pattern stops being coincidence? Jung believed that unconscious material tends to repeat itself until consciousness develops enough to confront it. This is why changing external circumstances does not always change a person's life. You can move cities, change relationships, change careers, delete contacts, reinvent your appearance, start again. But if the unconscious pattern travels with you, Eventually, the new world begins to resemble the old one. Because you changed the stage. You did not change the actor. And perhaps you have experienced this yourself. You promised that the next relationship would be different. Then you found yourself attracted to someone who awakened the same insecurity. You promised that this time you would set boundaries. Then the fear of disappointing someone appeared and you surrendered again. You promised that when the opportunity came, you would finally believe in yourself. Then the opportunity arrived, and suddenly every insecurity you thought you had overcome returned. This is why willpower alone often fails. The conscious mind says, "I want something new." But another part of the psyche whispers, "Something new is dangerous." And when those two forces collide, the conscious mind is not always the strongest one. That hidden conflict explains something many people misunderstand about self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is rarely completely irrational. From the perspective of the unconscious, it may actually be protection. Imagine someone who learned very early that visibility leads to criticism. As an adult, they consciously want success. They build something, work for years. Finally, people begin noticing them, and precisely when success approaches, they freeze. They procrastinate. They make strange mistakes. They lose motivation. Consciously, it makes no sense. But unconsciously, visibility still means danger. So one part of them is pursuing success while another part is protecting them from it. This is not weakness. It is psychological conflict. And you cannot solve a conflict you refuse to acknowledge exists. This is why Jung's work was never simply about thinking positively. Positive thinking cannot integrate what you refuse to see. You can repeat, "I deserve love." But if somewhere beneath consciousness intimacy has become associated with abandonment, you may continue choosing emotionally unavailable people. You can repeat, "I am confident." But if your identity depends upon approval, one person's rejection may still collapse your entire sense of worth. You can say, "I've moved on." But if you still organize your behavior around what happened, psychologically, some part of you may still be standing in the same room. The unconscious does not care what you claim to have overcome. It reveals itself through what continues to control you. And this gives us a much more useful question than, "Why does this keep happening to me?" Ask instead, "What part of me keeps participating in this pattern?" That question is harder because it removes the comfort of seeing ourselves only as victims of circumstances. But it also gives something back: power. If everything is outside you, you can only wait for the world to change. But if even part of the pattern exists inside you, then there is something you can actually confront. And this is where we reach the first major threshold. Because your shadow is not the deepest thing Jung believed was influencing you. Behind your personal wounds, behind the experiences of childhood, behind even the identity you constructed, Jung believed there existed another layer of the psyche, something you did not personally create, something older than your memories, older than your parents, older, in a psychological sense, than the life you consciously remember. And according to Jung, this hidden layer explains why human beings separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles continue dreaming similar images, creating similar myths, and falling into remarkably similar psychological patterns. The shadow is personal, but what lies beneath it is much larger. And once we enter that territory, the question is no longer simply, "What have you hidden from yourself?" It becomes, "What has been living inside humanity long before you were born, and may still be living through you now?" Jung called this deeper layer of the psyche the collective unconscious. And this is where his psychology becomes far more unsettling, because the collective unconscious is not made of your personal memories. It is not simply your childhood. It is not your private pain. It is not the story you can consciously remember. It is a deeper psychological inheritance, a structure of patterns, images, impulses, and symbolic possibilities that did not begin with you. Think of your conscious personality as a house. Inside the rooms are your memories, your relationships, your wounds, your beliefs, your ambitions, your regrets, your personal history. But beneath the house is a foundation you did not build. And beneath that foundation is something even older, a vast psychological ground shared by human beings across generations. This was Jung's radical proposal, that beneath the personal unconscious, there are universal patterns of experience that repeatedly emerge wherever human beings exist. The child, the mother, the hero, the wise old figure, the trickster, the enemy, the sacrifice, the descent into darkness, the death of the old self, the return, the rebirth. You see these patterns in religion, in mythology, in ancient stories, in modern films, in dreams, in relationships, in political movements, in the stories people tell about themselves. The costumes change. The psychological pattern survives. Jung called these patterns archetypes. And an archetype is not simply a character you can memorize from a psychology book. It is more like an invisible structure that organizes experience. You do not necessarily see the archetype itself. You see what it produces. Imagine wind. You cannot see wind directly, but you see trees bending. You see leaves moving. You feel pressure against your skin. Archetypes work in a similar way. You see them through emotions, dreams, fantasies, obsessions, attractions, repeated relationship dynamics, symbols that seem strangely powerful, moments when you suddenly feel larger than yourself or much smaller than yourself. And when an archetypal pattern becomes activated strongly enough, something peculiar can happen. You stop feeling like you are simply having an emotion. It feels as though the emotion has you. You are no longer merely angry. Anger takes possession of the room. You are no longer merely in love. The other person becomes destiny. You are no longer simply afraid. The situation becomes a monster. You are no longer simply ambitious. You become convinced that your entire existence depends upon winning. This is one reason people behave so strangely under intense psychological pressure. The conscious personality is not always the only force present. Something deeper may have been activated. And if you don't recognize that force, you may confuse psychological possession with truth. This becomes especially visible in relationships. Have you ever met someone and almost immediately felt that you already knew them? Not literally, but emotionally, as though something about them felt ancient, familiar, inevitable. Maybe you became intensely attracted far faster than the actual relationship justified. You knew very little about the person, yet your imagination filled in everything you did not know. You gave them depth they had not shown, virtues they had not demonstrated, intentions they had never expressed. You were not only meeting the person, you were meeting your projection. Jung saw romantic attraction as one of the great theaters of the unconscious, because we often place enormous pieces of our inner world onto another human being. We don't only see who they are, we see who we need them to be. The rescuer, the perfect lover, the mother, the father, the forbidden one, the wounded one we must save, the person who will finally prove that we are worthy. And the more unconscious the projection, the stronger the emotional spell can become. This is why a person can become psychologically enormous in your mind. They send one message. Your entire mood changes. They become distant. You panic. They give you attention. You feel alive again. They reject you. Something inside you collapses. At that point, ask yourself a difficult question. Are you reacting to the person or to what the person represents? Because those are not always the same thing. Sometimes what you call love is partly recognition of an unconscious image. Sometimes what you call hatred is partly confrontation with your shadow. Sometimes what you call destiny is a psychological pattern trying to repeat itself. And this is why consciousness matters. Not because consciousness eliminates emotion, but because it creates distance between you and the forces moving through you. Without that distance, you identify with everything. I am angry. I am worthless. I need this person. I cannot survive this rejection. I must prove myself. But awareness slowly changes the language. There is anger in me. There is a wounded part of me feeling worthless. There is a projection happening. There is a fear of abandonment being activated. There is something in me trying to prove itself. That shift may sound small. Psychologically, it is enormous. Because the moment you can observe an inner force, you are no longer completely identical with it. You have created space, and space is where choice begins. This is one of the foundations of individuation. But before individuation can happen, another illusion has to break. The illusion that the personality you show the world is your entire identity. Jung called that social personality the persona. And unlike the shadow, the persona is not necessarily dark. In fact, it is necessary. You need a social identity. You behave differently in a job interview than you do alone in your bedroom. You speak differently to a child than to a stranger. You adapt. You perform roles. You participate in society. There is nothing inherently wrong with that. The danger begins when the mask becomes fused with the face. When you forget that the role is a role, you become the successful person, the spiritual person, the strong person, the intellectual person, the helpful person, the perfect mother, the perfect partner, the responsible child, the one who never gets angry, the one who never needs anyone, the one who always has the answer. And now something very subtle begins, because everything that contradicts the persona must be pushed away. And this is where the deeper question begins. If the persona is only the face you learn to present, then becoming whole cannot mean perfecting the mask. It means discovering a center large enough to hold both what you consciously know and what still lives outside your awareness. And this is one of the most important distinctions in his psychology. The ego is not the self. The ego is the center of your conscious identity. It says, I think, I want, I remember, I choose. The self, in Jung's framework, represents the greater totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, known and unknown, light and shadow. The personality you recognize and the deeper patterns you are still discovering. This is why individuation is not the ego becoming more powerful. In many ways, it is the ego realizing that it was never the entire kingdom. And that realization can feel like defeat, because the ego wants control. It wants certainty. It wants to be the author of everything. Then life shows you otherwise. A dream disturbs you. A relationship exposes you. A crisis breaks your identity. A loss removes your certainty. An emotion appears that contradicts everything you believed about yourself. And suddenly the ego confronts something larger. This is why some of the most transformative experiences of life begin with humiliation. Not humiliation imposed by cruelty. Psychological humility. The realization, I do not know myself as completely as I thought. That sentence can be terrifying. It can also be the beginning of freedom. Because the person who believes they already know themselves has no reason to look deeper. The person who says, "I could never be manipulated," becomes easy to manipulate through the part they refuse to see. The person who says, "I am never jealous," cannot examine jealousy consciously. The person who says, "I don't care what anyone thinks," may become completely governed by the need to prove they don't care. The stronger the denial, sometimes the stronger the unconscious possession. So individuation begins not with certainty, but with curiosity. What else is here? What am I not seeing? What contradiction am I refusing? What part of myself have I given to another person? What keeps repeating? What triggers me? What do my fantasies reveal? What do my dreams keep returning to? Where am I performing? Where am I lying to myself? Those questions do not give instant answers, but they slowly turn unconscious life into conscious relationship. And that is the difference. The goal is not to make the unconscious disappear. The goal is to stop treating it like a stranger who secretly owns the house. Because the truth is, you cannot become whole by amputating half of yourself. You cannot become free by pretending your shadow does not exist. You cannot know yourself while only studying the parts you already approve of. And you cannot complete individuation while your deepest patterns remain invisible. But there is one more danger. A danger that often appears precisely when people begin doing this work. The ego can take psychological knowledge and turn it into another mask. You learn about the shadow. You learn about projection. You learn about archetypes. You begin seeing patterns everywhere, and suddenly you think, "I understand people now. I am more conscious than they are. They are projecting. They are trapped in their ego. They haven't integrated their shadow." And without realizing it, your psychological growth becomes psychological superiority. The ego has stolen the language of awakening. You have not escaped the trap. The trap has simply become more sophisticated. And Jung's psychology contains an archetype that perfectly represents this moment. The trickster. Because sometimes the most dangerous stage of self-knowledge begins exactly when you become convinced that you can no longer deceive yourself. The trickster appears wherever certainty becomes too comfortable. It destabilizes, confuses, exposes contradiction, breaks the illusion that you have finally understood yourself completely. And psychologically, that function is essential, because one of the greatest dangers on the path of self-knowledge is believing that self-knowledge has made you immune to unconsciousness. It has not. You can learn the language of psychology and still use it unconsciously. You can talk about boundaries while avoiding intimacy. You can speak about authenticity while carefully constructing a new identity for others to admire. You can talk about healing while secretly organizing your life around an old wound. You can study projection and still project. You can recognize manipulation in others while refusing to see the ways you manipulate. You can speak constantly about ego while being governed by the need to appear egoless. The unconscious is extraordinarily creative. It does not always return wearing the same face. When one mask becomes visible, another can take its place. And this is why Jung's psychology was never a simple system of labels. The point is not to identify yourself as one archetype or another. The point is to recognize when a pattern has taken possession of you. Because the moment you turn an archetype into an identity, the ego has found another costume. I am the wounded healer. I am the lone wolf. I am the chosen one. I am the awakened one. I am the empath. I am the misunderstood genius. Sometimes these identities contain truth. But notice what happens when you become emotionally dependent on them. Now you need life to keep confirming the story. You need other people to remain shallow so you can remain deep. You need others to remain asleep so you can remain awake. You need someone to keep hurting you so you can remain the wounded one. You need rejection to keep proving that nobody understands you. And suddenly your suffering is no longer just something you want to heal. It becomes part of who you believe you are. This is one of the strangest forms of psychological attachment. We can become attached even to our wounds, because wounds provide identity. They explain us. They organize our memories. They tell us who the villain was, who the victim was, why we are the way we are. And if the wound disappears, a frightening question emerges. Who am I without this story? That question is often more terrifying than the pain itself. Which is why people sometimes unconsciously recreate conditions that preserve familiar suffering. Not because they enjoy pain, but because familiar pain feels psychologically safer than unfamiliar freedom. The unconscious often prefers the known over the good. Think about that carefully. A toxic relationship may be painful, but if its emotional structure resembles something you learned very early, it can feel strangely familiar. A distant partner, a critical authority figure, someone who gives affection inconsistently, someone you must constantly impress. You may consciously say, "I hate this." Yet another part of you recognizes the pattern, and recognition can be mistaken for connection. This is one reason people sometimes say, "I knew there was something special about them from the beginning." Perhaps there was. But special does not always mean healthy. Sometimes what feels like instant familiarity is your nervous system recognizing an old emotional architecture. And once the pattern activates, the psyche begins trying to complete an unfinished story. This time I will make the distant person choose me. This time I will finally be enough. This time I will save them. This time I will win the approval I could never win before. This time I will not be abandoned. Except you are no longer dealing only with the person in front of you. You may be fighting a much older battle through them. And unless that becomes conscious, the relationship becomes a stage. The actors change. The script survives. This is where Jung's idea of the complex becomes important. A complex is an emotionally charged cluster of memories, associations, images, beliefs, and expectations organized around a particular psychological theme. Abandonment, inferiority, authority, worthiness, rejection, power, shame. A complex is not simply a thought, it has energy. And when activated, it can temporarily narrow your perception. Suddenly, you do not see the present clearly. You see the present through the lens of the complex. Someone takes 2 hours to answer your message. For another person, it means nothing. For you, perhaps it becomes evidence of rejection. A manager gives feedback. For one person, it is useful information. For someone dominated by an inferiority complex, it feels like public humiliation. A partner asks for space. If abandonment has psychological power over you, the request may feel like the beginning of catastrophe. This is why two people can experience the same event and live completely different psychological realities. The event is only one layer. The complex interpreting the event is another. And when a complex is activated strongly enough, Jung described something almost like temporary possession. Your emotional reaction becomes larger than your conscious intention. You say things you did not plan to say. You send messages you regret. You attack. You withdraw. You beg. You freeze. You become someone you later barely recognize. Then, when the emotional charge passes, you ask, "What happened to me?" Something happened to you, but it did not begin in that moment. That moment activated something that was already there. And this gives us one of the most useful practices in Jungian self-observation. When your reaction becomes disproportionate, do not only analyze the event. Analyze the part of you that was activated. Ask, what did this situation mean to me? What fear appeared? What story did my mind immediately create? What does this remind me of? When have I felt this exact emotion before? Not the same situation, the same emotion. That distinction matters, because sometimes the present is simply the doorway through which the past re-enters. And if you only fight the present, you may never find the deeper source. This does not mean you should excuse harmful behavior from others. If someone lies, manipulates, betrays, or abuses trust, reality matters. Jungian psychology is not an invitation to blame yourself for everything. It is an invitation to examine why certain experiences acquire such enormous psychological force and why certain patterns keep returning. Understanding these ideas matters only if they change the way you meet your own reactions. The real work begins in ordinary moments, when a trigger appears and you choose curiosity instead of automatic judgment. But that reaction can push the very material you need to understand back into the shadow. Instead, become interested. There is something inside you making decisions before you realize a decision has been made. It chooses who attracts you, who irritates you, what you fear, what you avoid, what you repeatedly destroy just when it begins to matter. And perhaps the most disturbing part is this. You can spend your entire life obeying it while believing you are completely free. Think about the patterns you have repeated. The relationship that somehow felt different in the beginning but ended with the same emotional wound. The opportunity you wanted desperately, until it finally came close enough to become real. And suddenly you procrastinated, hesitated, or found a reason to walk away. The person who triggered an anger in you so disproportionate that later you wondered why their words had affected you so deeply. The moments when you knew exactly what you should do, and still did the opposite. We usually explain these things with simple words. Bad luck, personality, chemistry, timing, trauma, fate. But Carl Jung believed something far more unsettling. He believed that beneath the personality you consciously recognize exists another psychological world, ancient, emotional, symbolic, and largely invisible. And when you do not understand that world, it does not remain passive. It begins to live your life for you. This may be one of the most important ideas you ever encounter about yourself. What you do not know about yourself can have more power over your life than what you do know. And before this video ends, you may recognize a force inside yourself that has been influencing you for years, perhaps decades. Once you recognize it, however, something changes. Because what has been controlling you from darkness loses some of its power the moment you can finally see it, behind even the identity you constructed. Jung believed there existed another layer of the psyche, something you did not personally create, something older than your memories, older than your parents, older, in a psychological sense, than the life you consciously remember. And according to Jung, this hidden layer explains why human beings separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles continue dreaming similar images, creating similar myths, and falling into remarkably similar psychological patterns. The shadow is personal, but what lies beneath it is much larger. And once we enter that territory, the question is no longer simply, what have you hidden from yourself? It becomes, what has been living inside humanity long before you were born, and may still be living through you now? Jung called this deeper layer of the psyche the collective unconscious. And this is where his psychology becomes far more unsettling, especially in the moments when your emotional reaction seems larger than what just happened. Someone criticizes you and you cannot stop thinking about it. Someone ignores you and suddenly you feel worthless. Someone succeeds and irritation appears. Someone disagrees with you and you feel an overwhelming need to prove them wrong. Someone becomes distant and anxiety immediately takes over. Do not begin with, how do I stop feeling this? Begin with, why did this have so much power over me? Then wait. Do not accept the first answer automatically. The conscious mind is very good at producing explanations that protect the existing identity. Because they're disrespectful. Because they're selfish. Because what they did was wrong. Perhaps. But go deeper. Why did this particular behavior penetrate so deeply? What did it threaten? Your intelligence? Your desirability? Your goodness? Your importance? Your control? Your fear of being abandoned? Your need to be needed? Your image of yourself? Strong emotion often protects something. Find what it is protecting. This is the first practice. Follow the emotional charge. Your strongest reactions often mark the places where unconscious material is closest to the surface. The second practice is more difficult. Study repetition. Take one pattern in your life that has happened at least 3 times. Not an isolated event. A pattern. Maybe you repeatedly become attached to unavailable people. Maybe you repeatedly overwork until you collapse. Maybe every friendship eventually turns into a relationship where you give more than you receive. Maybe you repeatedly delay important projects until the opportunity disappears. Maybe you become excited about change and then retreat when change becomes real. Write the pattern down. Then remove the names. This is important. Do not write, "John abandoned me. Sarah used me. My boss didn't appreciate me." Remove the characters temporarily. Write the structure. I become intensely attached to someone whose attention is inconsistent. I take responsibility for other people's needs and eventually become resentful. I seek opportunities but retreat when visibility increases. Now the pattern becomes easier to see. Then ask, what role do I repeatedly play inside this structure? This is not blame. It is pattern recognition. Maybe you repeatedly become the rescuer, the invisible one, the abandoned one, the perfect one, the misunderstood one, the responsible one, the one who waits, the one who proves, the one who never asks, the one who leaves first. Once you identify the role, ask the question that can make you uncomfortable. What does this role protect me from? Perhaps rescuing people protects you from having to reveal your own needs. Perhaps choosing unavailable partners protects you from true intimacy. Perhaps perfection protects you from shame. Perhaps invisibility protects you from criticism. Perhaps leaving first protects you from being abandoned. The behavior that hurts you may also be protecting you from something you fear even more. That is why simply forcing yourself to stop often fails. You must understand what the pattern is doing for you. Only then can you begin finding a healthier way to meet the need underneath it. As you reclaim these rejected qualities, something changes in the way other people affect you. What once seemed to possess enormous power over your emotions can begin to return to its proper size. The spell begins to weaken. That is why self-knowledge can change relationships without changing the other person. They may remain exactly who they are. But you stop asking them to carry pieces of your psyche. You stop asking someone else to prove your worth, to complete you, to rescue you, to give you permission to exist, to embody all the courage you refuse to claim, to carry all the darkness you refuse to admit. And suddenly you see them, not the fantasy, not the archetype, not the projection, the human being. And perhaps for the first time, you can decide whether you actually want them in your life. That is a very different kind of choice. It is less intoxicating, but more conscious. And consciousness often feels quieter than compulsion. Compulsion screams, "I need this." Consciousness asks, "Do I choose this?" Compulsion says, "I cannot lose them." Consciousness asks, "Why does losing them feel like losing myself?" Compulsion says, I must prove them wrong. Consciousness asks, what part of me still needs their recognition? Compulsion says, this is simply who I am. Consciousness asks, who taught me that? These questions interrupt automatic life. And once automatic life is interrupted, fate begins to look different. Perhaps this is what Jung's most famous insight was pointing toward. What remains unconscious does not simply disappear because you refuse to examine it. It continues shaping the direction of your life. Then you experience the consequences and call them fate. But imagine what happens when the pattern becomes visible. The relationship ends, and instead of immediately finding the same person in another body, you stop. The opportunity appears, and instead of sabotaging it automatically, you recognize the fear of visibility. Someone criticizes you, and instead of collapsing, you notice the old wound asking for approval. You feel envy, and instead of attacking the person, you ask what unlived possibility has been exposed. You feel anger, and instead of exploding or suppressing it, you ask what boundary has been crossed. This does not make life perfect. It makes life more yours. Because fewer decisions are being made by forces you cannot see. And maybe that is what becoming yourself actually means. Not creating a new personality. Not becoming permanently confident. Not eliminating every flaw, but gradually reclaiming the pieces of your psyche that were scattered across fear, projection, performance, relationships, and unconscious patterns. Piece by piece, until you no longer need to divide yourself into acceptable and unacceptable halves, until you can look at your own darkness without worshiping it and without running from it, until you can recognize your capacity for destruction and consciously choose creation, until you can admit your hunger for love without becoming enslaved by anyone willing to offer you a little attention, until you can acknowledge ambition without shame, vulnerability without humiliation, anger without cruelty, power without domination, need without self-abandonment. That is integration, not perfection. Wholeness. And perhaps the greatest paradox is this: the more completely you accept that darkness exists within you, the less power darkness has to surprise you. The more honestly you acknowledge your need for approval, the less automatically you sacrifice yourself for approval. The more consciously you acknowledge your capacity for envy, the easier it becomes to transform envy into information. The more clearly you see your shadow, the less necessary it becomes to find enemies who can carry it for you. That is why confronting yourself is not narcissistic. Done properly, it changes how you encounter everyone else. You become less reactive, less idealizing, less condemning, less dependent on people behaving exactly as you need them to behave. Because you are no longer asking the outside world to organize everything you refuse to organize inside. And this may be one of the deepest forms of responsibility a human being can take. Not responsibility for everything that happened to you. Some things were never your choice. Not responsibility for other people's behavior. That belongs to them. Responsibility for what happens inside you now. For what you continue. For what you repeat. For what you project. For what you refuse to see. And for what you choose once you finally see it. That is where your responsibility begins. And so does your freedom. If you've stayed with me this far, don't leave this as another idea you found interesting for 40 minutes and then forgot. Choose one pattern, only one. Something that keeps returning in your life. And tonight, write this question somewhere you can see it. What is this pattern trying to show me about myself? Do not force the answer. Watch. Notice. Dream. Pay attention to your reactions. Pay attention to who triggers you. Pay attention to what you repeatedly avoid. The answer may not arrive as a sentence. It may arrive as recognition. A moment where suddenly something you have repeated for years becomes visible. And once you see it, you cannot completely return to not seeing it. If this journey gave you a new way of understanding yourself, subscribe to the Kingdom Within and stay with us. And in the comments, you can leave just one sentence. I am willing to see. Not because you already have all the answers, but because the willingness to look is where the real work begins. Carl Jung spent his life exploring a truth most people would rather avoid. There is far more inside us than the identity we consciously know. The shadow, the persona, complexes, archetypes, projections, the collective unconscious, the self. Invisible forces constantly interacting beneath the surface. You can ignore them. You can deny them. You can spend your entire life blaming circumstances for every pattern that repeats. Or you can turn inward, not to escape life, but to finally participate in it consciously. Because the most important territory you will ever explore is not somewhere far away. It is the territory you carry everywhere, into every relationship, every decision, every fear, every ambition, every beginning, every ending, your inner world. And until you begin understanding what lives there, you may never know how much of your life was actually being chosen by you, and how much was being chosen in the dark. But once you begin to see, the darkness is no longer quite as powerful, and that may be where your real life begins.